Good afternoon, everyone. Could you please take your seats, please? Okay, thank you all. Welcome back. I'm Frank Pandol from Leidos Corporation, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Andrew Erickson. We're very privileged to have him. He is a professor of strategy and the research director at the U.S. Naval War College China Maritime Studies Institute, CMSI. A founding member, he helped establish CMSI and stand it up officially in 2006. Currently, Dr. Erickson is a visiting professor and full-time resident at Harvard University's Department of Governance. He is a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations and serves as on the editorial boards of the Naval War College Review and the journal Asia Policy. He asked me also to mention that he has a personal website, www.andrewerickson.com, where he posts his latest research, and if you find this interesting, he offers that to you to follow his research as it continues. Dr. Erickson.
Well, thank you, Admiral, for that kind introduction. I couldn't be more honored to speak with you all today, share some thoughts on where I think China's military strategic trajectory is headed under Xi Jinping and what we need to do about it. I could really, if we were extremely pressed for time, summarize it like this. Your work could not be more important, the stakes could not be higher, and the timeline could not be more urgent. That is the key message I want to share with you today. However, I'd like to offer some details also to support this argument. Broadly speaking, we're now in the decade of maximum danger, the maximum danger of a peaking or plateauing China under Xi Jinping in terms of relative power, trying to make the most of this power to do highly disruptive things that severely damage our national interests and those of our allies and partners, as well as the world that we've worked so hard to create in the post-war era after the massive expenditure of blood and treasure in World War II. A lot of things coming together at once. I would argue now that not only are we in the decade of maximum danger, even worse and very relevant to everyone's work here, we are in the FIDIP of maximum danger, the period of maximum vulnerability before China has more conclusively slowed down in its growth and shifted its priorities, and before we have been fully able to ramp up the programs and capabilities that I know American ingenuity and patriotism is uniquely capable of rallying to provide. I believe that is the moment we are in right now, and hence I was especially honored, as you can see in the photograph here, to accompany a delegation to Taiwan in June and meet with President Tsai Ing-wen for the second time that I've had that opportunity. And this isn't just to tell you that I do occasionally get out of the office and out of the library. It's also to focus our attention especially on Taiwan and Xi Jinping's threats to Taiwan. I think this is really the highest stakes the highest stakes geography, the highest stakes issue, the highest stakes friction point that the decade or the FIDIP of maximum danger is focused on, given Xi Jinping's concerning goals here. So I'm going to start with what we're up against, and I know everyone here has some sense, but I want to put before you some key points and some visualization from your consideration, because I think it's really something gargantuan and serious that we face from China. And I'm going to focus on military maritime examples. Notice I didn't just say naval examples, although that's the leading importance. But the broad ramp up, the concerning ramp up that I'm talking about applies to all major services of China and domains. But I'm just using the maritime window that we study the most at our China Maritime Studies Institute to offer you some examples here. So Chinese sources, and of course at CMSI we examine in a careful kind of portfolio pedigree sense. Can talk about that in the Q&A if you're interested in our methodology. But the bottom line is we focus on serious, official, well-informed sources. These are not, fanboy or fangirl things pulled off the internet. I have just a couple examples for you in these slides. There's a widespread sense among serious PRC analysts that our shipbuilding industry is struggling to deliver what China thinks we want to have. They zero in on this, and I think there's a lot we can do to really show them that we have what it takes, but we should just be honest with ourselves that they have identified this as a weakness that they think we have, and they're trying to figure out ways to target what they perceive as a vulnerability quite mercilessly. They also see this area as one of their leading strengths, and in many senses, rightly so. The numerical ramp up, however you want to measure it, has just been extraordinary. And now by most major measures of warships, they are significantly ahead in numbers of hulls. And that alone is a big deal, especially when you consider that we retain global, worldwide responsibilities and focus, and they tend to operate much more in prioritized layers with nothing more important at sea for them than the innermost layer of the contested Yellow Sea, East China Sea, and South China Sea, where all of China's unresolved maritime sovereignty claims and island feature disputes lie. So again, another chart from another figure from Ron O'Rourke's latest Congressional Research Service report, which I commend to anyone who hasn't had a chance to look through it. And Ron's work is always informed by numbers provided by ONI when he can get unclassified ones for publication. So it's a great resource and a great way to get the word out to people who need to know in the unclassed realm and the public just how serious a ramp up this is that China's engaged in. Of course, also, the China Military Power Report showcases this quite effectively. And the build-out that the Department of Defense projects is nothing short of staggering. Even with the transfer of 22 corvettes to China's Coast Guard, look at these projections out to 2025 and 2030, out to 440 battle force ships for the PLA Navy. And by the way, those Jiangdao class corvettes are no slouch either. They have limitations in armaments, but they're quite fast and they're quite numerous. And I actually was with our Dean of International Programs at the Naval War College, Tom Mangold, on one of these ships in 2015. So I've seen it firsthand back in an earlier era, what's now a different era for U.S.-China relations. Now, how did China build this world's largest navy by number of ships by a significant margin? Well, there's some misconception that China builds ships faster. It doesn't build ships appreciably faster, sometimes a little bit faster, sometimes slower than we do it. They're just building a lot more at once. And how can they do this? Well, for more than 20 years now, they've had a focused, prioritized strategy. They've had a continual allocation of significant amounts of funding for new build shipyards and facilities and actually building the ships themselves. No interruption with continuing resolutions or all the things that our defense industry has struggled with obstacles. They pursue a process of what you might call imitative innovation. This is common to China's defense sector. Basically, China has the world's largest human and organizational apparatus for bringing in technology by all means possible, including espionage, then applying it both in their civilian and their military sectors. And in many cases, they take what you might call the 80% solution. You could say that their ships, if you analyze them exhaustively, might seem to have less battle damage resistance capability, but they, generally speaking in their analysis, think that a mission kill is fairly easy to achieve in certain circumstances, and then the ship is not going to be very useful anyway. There are pluses and minuses to that approach, but it's fair to say that in comparison, we're accepting risk on numbers, although it's not necessarily because we want to, it's the circumstances we're up against. Now, just a quick drive through China's naval shipyards to show you visually. It's really, this is a story of how much is happening at once in such enormous facilities. All kinds of different ships in very large facilities being built simultaneously. I'd call your attention especially to the Type 055 Renhai cruiser. If you just look at the loadouts on the Renhais, the weapons loadouts, it's extraordinary. It's a lot for us to be up against in any kind of naval encounter. And China has really been focusing on this and developing this concertedly for a long time. But even now with the world's largest military shipbuilding base, they're continuing to expand their facilities. It's really quite remarkable here. Here's some more simultaneous construction at Jiangnan Changxing Island near Shanghai. Historically, the Yangtze River being one of the great centers of Chinese naval ship construction. And for a little comparison here that I think will resonate with many in industry, Jiangnan Changxing Island is huge, 8.2 square kilometers, nearly 4 times the size of HII Newport News shipyard. And it's not just the size, because they've built these shipyards relatively recently, they've been able to incorporate a lot of innovations in just how to do things, how to improve, a lot of work going on at once. And when I mention work going on at once, we should also reflect on China's shipbuilding workforce. It's enormous, and there's a lot of military-civilian crossover. We had one of our annual conferences at CMSI several years ago on Chinese naval shipbuilding. There was a lot of debate about, well, aren't there a lot of downsides if you mix civ mil together? Well, different people had different views, but ultimately we felt on the whole it seems to be working for China, especially with their sort of 80% solution. Build more platforms, arguably accept more battle damage risk, and as I'll get yet more facilities envisioned here. They have found a way to optimize the strengths of their system to develop something formidable. As my mother would say, the proof is in the pudding. Look at this major ramp up, but now I want to talk about all 3 of China's sea forces. That's why I say military, maritime, and not just naval. Obviously, the PLA Navy is the most powerful and consequential, but as this recent U.S. Navy chart based on O&I data, unclassified like everything I'm talking about and showing you here today, look at this ramp up over the past 2 decades into the end of this decade, when you add up all 3 of China's sea forces. And I want to dive into that because not enough people really understand the full extent of China's sea forces. Everyone understands the PLA Navy, and those numbers are huge. But look at the size of China's Coast Guard on top of that. Then look at the size of China's Maritime Militia. And by the way, there's a lot to say about that. I'll have a few slides. I can say more in the Q&A for you. But in my personal view, while I deeply love and respect O&I and its analysts, as a maritime militia nerd who's been involved in a lot of the research on this shadowy Third Sea Force of China since 2014, I can tell you, I think this is an overly strict constructionist interpretation of the numbers of China's just the most advanced maritime militia vessels. I think the maritime militia component at the top of this should be higher, even if you're just counting the most advanced vessels. So it's even worse than this chart suggests. Now, for those who are focused on Chinese sea power, PRC, military maritime issues, I ask you to try to remember this slide, because this really shows how China's 3 sea forces work. They are all part of China's armed forces. So the People's Liberation Army has its own sea force, the People's Liberation Army Navy, the largest in the world, significantly larger than the US Navy by numbers of ships, as we've just discussed. But on top of that, the People's Armed Police, another component of China's armed forces, since 2018 has been in charge of China's Coast Guard, which is the largest Coast Guard in the world by numbers of ships and is much more militarized and much more charged with disputed sovereignty advancement missions than many other Coast Guards, certainly much more than ours is, given our cooperative approach to managing the few territorial issues that we have had over the years. But finally, the People's Armed Forces militia, part of China's armed forces. It's not some mysterious, irregular force that's just disconnected and you can't pin it down. No, formally part of China's armed forces, reporting up a PLA chain of command to the Central Military Commission and to Commander-in-Chief Xi Jinping himself. And the People's Armed Forces militia has its own sea force. Some call it China's Maritime Militia, if you don't want too many words. My colleagues and I have coined the term People's Armed Forces Maritime Militia, just to make clear how it's connected. I know that's a mouthful, so there are different ways. If you wonder what the Chinese sources say, they just say the Maritime Militia. So that, for them, they don't need all these extra references. It's understood. But I just implore you, if you're involved in a discussion or have a chance to speak publicly, or you're in a policy discussion, do not buy into the combination of misinformation, disinformation, or lack of awareness that to this day, in so many sources, just muddies the waters with references to Chinese fishermen, irregular fishermen, fishing militia. It's part of China's armed forces. It's undeniable. Now, we're on the theme of ramp up. It's pretty much a huge ramp up across the board. China's Coast Guard has had an even more dramatic ramp up over the last 2 decades in numbers than China's Navy here. And if you look at this eye chart, ONI's latest public recognition guide, I mean, I just got a new eyeglasses prescription yesterday, so it really helped me with this. I can help people get access to this chart on ONI's website if anyone's interested. You really need to expand it and zoom in, but we don't have time to go through every ship class here, so let's just take one example and zoom in on this box that in my PowerPoint Luddite fashion, I just put a little box over here. These are some of China's Coast Guard vessels, and look at all the hull numbers that are listed here, and at the bottom plus additional. Now imagine zooming out to that whole chart, and this is where we look at China's overall sea forces and the numbers, and it's just extraordinary. China's Maritime Militia. It is a big pyramid with a small elite at the top. And the analytical saving grace is that I think we only need to focus our analysis on this tiny pinnacle, because they are the only vessels and crews charged and empowered with involvement in international sea incidents, such as messing with our vessels, such as such as Impeccable, until I think we had better messaging and deterred that, but are also training for wartime missions, especially, for example, to support a cross-strait amphibious invasion of Taiwan should, God forbid, that ever happen. And these most advanced vessels in their crews are not fishermen, or in some case women, in any sense. They don't even bother to pretend to fish. They have these brand new vessels with mast-mounted water cannons, if you can see it in here, reinforced hulls and rub rails for ramming. In many cases, the ship itself is the weapon against smaller opponents like various Philippine vessels, and they engage in rotational forward deployments such as these AIS tracks you can see around Whitsun Reef. I could go on and on about maritime militia, but I won't here. The point is, it's when we're talking about scenarios in what China calls the near seas, especially the East China Sea and the South China Sea, where there are a lot of scenarios that we care deeply about, we have to factor all three of these sea forces into the equation. So to just wrap up shipbuilding across all sea forces here. China really has maximized their capabilities, their focus, their investment to build these numbers we're seeing today. But as I'll get to in a bit, I'm not just going to say what we're up against. I'm also going to cover what Xi Jinping is up against and why I think this decade, this FYDP, is really where it's really all coming together. China, through this rapid ship build-out, is starting to face in coming years a massive midlife overhaul challenge. They may well rise to the occasion, but it's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to subject them to many of the challenges that we have grappled with, and we are widely known to be grappling with, and China knows that we're grappling with. It's not just some magic one-sided story where China can steam ahead on this upward curve forever. In fact, I think the era is changing more quickly than many realize. The bad news is we have to get through at least a few more increasingly difficult years before we might well have advantages on the other side. So let's talk a little bit about dates and priorities. I sometimes talk to more scholarly audiences, and smart nitpicking people can kind of say, well, does any country really have a grand strategy or a long-term plan? Well, if you're smart enough and nitpicking enough, you can argue that nothing really counts. The bar's so high you can't meet it. But for our more practical, rough and ready analysis here, I would submit to you that to the extent that any country has a grand strategy and long-term goals, China under Xi Jinping has the grandest and most strategic plans of all. Now, the big plans out to 2049, I think so many things will happen and probably a lot of slowdown and challenges. I don't think we can really project with reliance to there. But unfortunately for us, Xi Jinping also has very concrete plans out to 2035 and especially out to 2027. And 2027's close enough, and China's still charging hard enough, I think they're going to make a lot of those targets. So that's where I'm going to dig in, and that's where I think we really need to focus. And the Chinese Communist Party, while making terrible human rights abuses and some grave strategic errors that are going to slow them down in the long run, like the tragic one-child policy, is generally pretty good at pursuing a number of top national objectives at once in a whole of government, whole of nation approach. And this applies to military priorities vis-a-vis the most important disputes to the Chinese Communist Party, especially Taiwan. That is the biggest prize that the Chinese Communist Party claims as part of the PRC that has not yet come under actual PRC control. Hence why it's no coincidence that Xi Jinping cites his goals, his priorities, his ruthless plans and execution are so focused on this area where so much is at stake. Taiwan is most important. But now let's talk about what Xi Jinping is up against. And what I've been arguing for over a decade now is that there's a life cycle of great powers, if you will. The countries that are not only large in territory and resources, the ones that become truly great powers are the ones that can consolidate in national leadership and organization. And generally when that happens, we've seen throughout history, there can be a real surge. Generally, there's a large and relatively young population. They are relatively acceptant of sacrifice and support of great national goals. They haven't yet developed societal claims in the areas of human rights, a welfare state, individual expression, and living lives that are not just in service of national goals. So in history, we can see leaders harnessing that for a period of explosive economic growth that can also be parlayed into explosive military growth. And my argument before you today is that China has achieved that very same pattern over the last 4 decades. Really a period of catch-up national growth after 3 decades of, in many ways, devastating Maoist malpractice under the initial PRC government. Xi Jinping is riding the tail end of this rapid period of growth, and he wants to ride it into more success and security for Chinese Communist Party rule, as well as that of himself, and a great place in Chinese history books. What he's up against is that, again, I argue to you today, before you today, China is facing an unusually rapidly gathering set of headwinds, slowing factors on growth, and competing priorities for these national resources that up until now, the party has had remarkable latitude in allocating, including to military purposes, such as the multiple military mega projects that we're up against, for example, these multiple anti-ship ballistic missile programs. This is all about to get a lot harder for China. But unfortunately, because there's a lag effect, and because China, I think, is nowhere close to slowing completely and, collapsing or anything like that, this is going to, every year over the next few years, we're going to look at the situation and say, this is an even worse force ramp up than we saw the previous year. What's coming online now, even if you just look at it at the open source level, is nothing short of staggering. But as we figure out our best strategy and our best efforts, I think what I call China's S-curve trajectory and slowdown can help us decide where to accept risk and where to place bets. And this is where I'm going to give you my own best thoughts. You don't have to accept it, but this is one framework that could offer a suggestion of how should we place our bets, where should we accept risk, how should we prioritize in a period where clearly it's gotten so rough that I think we all can agree we have to prioritize. So, the decade of maximum danger, even worse, the FIDIP of maximum danger. China, the PRC under Xi reaching peak growth rate, peak mobilization of resources and personnel ability, peaking threat to Taiwan, and critical U.S. interests. I could talk more in the Q&A about why I think Taiwan is inherently vital and strategic for us. I think we must make every effort to not let it fall, despite Xi Jinping's concerted effort to get there. Taiwan's unique position as what you might call the OPEC++ equivalent of advanced semiconductors alone, I think makes it very important for us to not let Taiwan fall to Chinese Communist Party pressure, or worse yet, military force under Xi Jinping. I'm happy to elaborate more on that. I think more broadly, there would be so many catastrophic effects were Taiwan to fall on our watch. The effects, these can't all even be retreated from. Even some would argue, well, we should just be realistic. It's gotten too difficult, or it might be too difficult. We might have to let Taiwan go. I want to submit to you, and I have further research on this that I'm happy to share for the specifics. The various immediate and fall-on effects would be so catastrophic. Again, just going back to semiconductors, it's the lifeblood of our big data world. If the Chinese Communist Party were able to disrupt the best innovation center, really Taiwan is not fully replaceable by any means. And worse yet, subsume at least aspects of it to answer to CCP priorities under Xi Jinping. That would affect our big data world, the balance of power, alliances, and partnerships technologically around the world. There's no retreating from that. That would be catastrophic. Anyway, that's part of the case I hope to make to you today. And so with this peaking risk to Taiwan and Xi Jinping being really focused on that, I think we need to focus the strongest of our efforts on holding that line the best we can by whatever means we can as urgently as possible. Now let's drill down more on this timeline. Like maritime militia, the concept of 2027, unfortunately, is not fully elaborated in many public testimony or discussions. It is also deliberately misrepresented by those who either, I think, don't understand what's at stake or don't have what I think are America's best interests in mind. So let's look at this date. It is not, based on my best discernment of Chinese language sources, it is not a deadline for Xi Jinping to invade Taiwan. There's no evidence that it is something as direct as that. Instead, it is very specifically and impactfully Xi Jinping's the goal that Xi Jinping has charged China's military with for development. Xi Jinping has told China's military, thou shalt achieve a suite of important capabilities no later than 2027 that, as the Pentagon China report rightly points out, correspond to key capabilities for Xi Jinping to try to address various Taiwan scenarios that he might like to threaten to do, or if worst came to worst, actually order his armed forces to execute. So this is very real and it's very significant, and it's all too often misportrayed. And here I really believe this, I cannot prove this in a court of law, but my best discernment of Chinese sources, scholarship on Xi Jinping, how I think he thinks to the best any of us could possibly know, I think this is a very personal timeline for him. I think he is just about the most ambitious and empowered 70-year-old on the planet, and I think he wants to change Taiwan's status to some form of being under CCP control, whatever that looks like, within his actuarially likely time and political power. And so that really makes this decade the time frame that he could logically expect to be at maximum vigor and capability, still in a very cutthroat political system, I should add, to be able to do this. And I think it explains some aspects of the trajectory of the goals and the ramp up that are filling up Xi Jinping's toolbox in a way that matches the goals. What Admiral Davidson and others have said, I think, quite logically and eloquently, no doubt drawing in their testimony on excellent staff analysis that draws on basically whole of nation information sources and analysis. What I want to communicate to you is using my open source work and that of my colleagues, we really come to the same point. It's striking how much trend lines and analysis are converging. And that's why I want to emphasize this as what I think is our biggest, most urgent challenge right now. So just a little bit more about, I know it's not always practical in every venue to trot out clunky official phrases. There are different ways to communicate in different venues. I get that. But I hope that when you all encounter someone, there's sort of, I call it the debunking industrial complex. There are a bunch of academics now and other folks, some I think deliberately acting against American interests, others just doing what they think is scholarship or a critical approach. They've fixated on the year 2027, which is sometimes, not said in context. And then they say, oh, well, there's nothing to back that up, so that's just cooked up by the US government, the US intelligence community, or other people who are, quote, threat inflating. I find that when I say, okay, well, look at Xi Jinping's actual policy, the Centennial Military Building Goal of 2027. So far, I have not had any takers among debunkers to actually address the meat and potatoes of what Xi Jinping in this very policy bumper sticker responsive PRC system. This is the big flashing lights guidance that Xi Jinping has. So I think that ideally, if people are poo-pooing or critiquing the idea of 2027 as an impactful timeline year, I mean, please bring up this Centennial Military Building Goal, at least in some brief way. I think we need that to help raise, frankly, awareness, national awareness. The American taxpayer needs to be read in and educated as to why they're being asked to fund important military programs and support national policies that in some cases may involve accepting some risk. It's all connected to that, and I think we all have a role to play in that. One of the few Chinese sources I'll just unpack for you here, because I just want to show you how real this is. This is from China's Ministry of National Defense website. It's a PLA daily commentary. This is an official source. This is part of this is how the PRC system works. Xi Jinping promulgates a big policy, the Centennial Military Development Goal. And then on down through this enormous party-state military parallel bureaucracy, there are endless party meetings to flesh out the broad concept and to apply it to whatever that particular organization is charged with doing, including in the military. So when you read China's official military publications, such as the PLA Daily, but also People's Navy, the PLA Navy's official newspaper, there are seemingly endless discussions about this is the important leadership guidance. How do we operationalize it? And they do this, it's exhausting, but it does help them coordinate. So this is a little window into how sometime after Xi Jinping initially rolled out the thou shalt goal, Now they're not just talking about the Centennial Military Building Goal, they're talking about planning for 2027. Now, I don't know all the details on what that means, but anyone worth their salt as a China researcher knows that this means serious stuff is happening in China's system, whether or not we can find out all the details of it. But you don't need to know all those internal details to look at the order of battle ramp up that I've been laying out here in these slides, even just open source. You can see what's happening. Again, this fits together. It's sort of the, well, do we have all the duck DNA? Maybe not, but we don't have the whole duck genome available to us, at least at the open source level, but it's certain, there are a lot of converging quacks here. So now I want to close before I hope we could have Q&A for as long as the organizers will allow on the timeline here. I want to share a few highlights from CMSI's most recent conference. This spring, here in Newport, we looked into Chinese undersea warfare, coming back full circle to our first CMSI conference held on China's future nuclear submarine force, held in 2005, even before our official establishment in 2006. And I'm going to use this same format of what we're up against, what Xi Jinping is up against. So what we're up against, and this is a quick look summary that I have on my website. It's on our CMSI website. Anyone who wants to make sure they can access all this, please just see me after this session. I will make sure that you have my contact information, the websites. It's all available. That's what we do. We want to make this available to you. So in the bad news category, we assess that with China's technological development and years of help from Russia that are increasing, and the help's increasing in some ways in the new Sino-Russian context, our open source analysis is that China's Type 095 SSN has the potential to approach the capabilities in terms of propulsion, quieting, sensors, and weapons of Russia's improved Akula-1 class SSN. And China's Type 096 SSBN has the potential to approach most capabilities, propulsion, sensors, weapons, albeit quieting like an improved Akula-1, of Russia's Dolgoruki class SSBN. So again, undersea warfare technology, especially submarines, is hard to do. This is a lagging area for China. But if they could just get it up to that level, that would give us a lot more difficulty, especially if they keep coordinating with Russia enough to pose some of those types of challenges. But now let's talk briefly of some of the things that Xi Jinping is up against, because the undersea realm remains one of our areas of greatest strength. And China has some real issues here. And we have the best technologies. We also have the best people and the best training. And this is where China's submarine force, we assess, still has some real weaknesses. One of them has to do with the personnel pipeline itself. There are few countries that take standardized testing more seriously than China. And nobody does it on the scale that China does. So it's very significant that of China's 18 PME institutions, the intake test scores for China's submarine academy are at the very bottom of the barrel. Think of that. A force that should be very technologically focused and demanding education requirements on personnel in that regard is at the bottom of the test score pile. In a country that sees test scores as much more the be-all, end-all, life-shaping everything than America does. So look, I think the American system has the greatest strengths, but judged by their own criteria, they do not prioritize the intake pipeline well. Then there's the whole issue of political commissars. Well, it's not the cartoonish Hunt for Red October type political commissar. It's more of a trying to do everything to fill. The new political commissars are more like HR, atheist chaplain, JAG, all rolled into one. But it is one of the most corrupt parts of the PLA, and a lot of the folks in that pipeline tend to be disincentivized to fully help the crews that they're supposed to support. Really checking the boxes and moving ahead to other commands is the way to go. So we believe in our assessment that there are ways in which we can impose uncertainties on PLA Navy submarine commanders and confront them with situations outside predicted parameters. There are a lot of things we can do amid this relentless ramp up in capability. So bringing it back up at the end here to what we're up against, I do believe Xi Jinping can be deterred on Taiwan, provided that we hold the line in the most credible way, constantly bringing our A game to every relevant situation here. I think he is a rational actor. I think he has considerable knowledge and experience regarding Taiwan. He worked up in provincial administration with many years in Fujian province opposite Taiwan. When I was in Taiwan in June meeting with a variety of ministers, they emphasized Xi's experience, interaction, especially with leading Taiwan business people, some of whom have kept in touch with him over the years. He's not totally out of touch and unrealistic. I do think he's willing to pay a terrible price if he thinks that the likelihood of success is high enough. This is totally my own hypothetical conception, but I think if you told Xi Jinping there's a confidence level that's very high, above XXX high percent, that you can achieve what you want on Taiwan if you sacrifice 10,000 members of China's armed forces. I think you would say we're going to do it. But it's the uncertainty that his system in general doesn't work well with, and I think we can keep imposing on him. So my exhortation to you in closing is that the stakes could not be higher, and the situation could not be more urgent. And because of this tough confluence of factors that we are up against right now, we're not just in the decade of maximum danger. In terms of program issues and in terms of Xi Jinping's ramp up and focus on preparing capabilities by 2027, we're in the FIDIP of maximum danger. If you look at the patterns of China's 5-year plan achievement, they always want to come under in the achievement if they can. So this is just working off what I think at the open source level is this relentless buildup and the general effort to come in under deadline. I think starting perhaps around 2025, we face the peaking risk of Xi Jinping feeling that China's armed forces largely have the toolbox he needs, and he's going to start flexing a lot harder to try to intimidate Taiwan, because he'd rather have Taiwan surrender to some kind of terms without a war. But Taiwan's public opinion is moving away from any kind of willingness on that. So I don't think he's going to achieve his goal just through flexing and intimidation. And this, in turn, I think is going to bring us to an even greater danger that we're on right now, which is fair to call maximum danger. It's daily deterrence. We can't afford to look weak, look like we're having a slip up. We have to have good answers, and there has to be public awareness. There'll be some things, of course, that will keep very close hold, but this has become a whole of a whole of information space effort. We have to have good answers, not only at the most unknowable level to many people, but also to the knowable level of everybody, because it's all playing out in there now. And if Taiwan's populace, God forbid, were to get so concerned and feel like they don't have any more hope, that in itself could be a factor that flips this whole equation. So in closing, I implore you to take away from this event, each of us can surely do something. We don't want to meet up at the Officers Club at the Naval War College a decade from now, lamenting what might have been and how much the world has changed to our great detriment, and putting our information together and suddenly realizing, well, you know, there were a few more things we could have done, and maybe that would have made the difference in holding the line. No, we all need to think about what stops can we pull out? There's got to be something more. And each of us needs to think about what that could be and how we can contribute to what I think is the biggest and most important mission of our era. Certainly, I think of my career. Thank you all very much. Happy to have any further discussion, either as a group or individually. I'm staying here for the next hour at least. And again, on my website, andrewerickson.com, I have all the background research to this, so you don't have to take my word for it. You can at least say, will I take his footnotes for it? It's all here, executive summary up front. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Yes. I want to ask about an article in AsiaTimes.com from 2 weeks ago that said that Chinese academics have discovered a way to detect submarines, no matter how stealthy, how deep, or at what speed they're moving. So my questions about that. First of all, if it's real, why would they announce it? Second of all, are you aware of this? And third, what else can you say about it?
Thank you for the question. And this is part of a larger pattern where there's a lot of public attention to either news about new military technologies and developments or rumors thereof. South China Morning Post has had coverage in this space. They now have a lot of these stories. And there's a lot of internet speculation. So that's a kind of boiling over cauldron. I'm skeptical of a lot of the most sweeping claims. Some of them seem quite extraordinary. Then again, I think there is some wheat amid some of the less sweeping chaff. It's the power of open sources. China can't hide everything it's doing because there has to be communication among researchers, and many of them still get ahead by publishing in scientific journals, including in foreign journals, especially in the dual-use space, oceanography and things like that, but even in some of the more military-focused naval shipbuilding areas. So I have no ability to assess that specific claim, but putting it in broader context, there is a lot going on. There is both wheat and chaff. A lot of the wheat is accessible and comparable with other sources to some extent at the open source level. I tend to be skeptical of the most sweeping claims. I certainly want to see more evidence on that. On the other hand, a lot of really concerning stuff is definitely happening, and we can follow a lot of it through the open sources. So thank you for that very important question.
Dr. Erickson, question for you. So earlier today, Senator Whitehouse spoke about climate change, and I'm curious if, in your opinion, if China takes global warming as seriously in practice as we do. And your article on China's energy nationalism suggests no. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, thank you very much for that question. And I try to be transparent and honest with everybody what I think is a more mainstream conventional wisdom view that I share with you versus my own, it's all my personal views, but what's something that's more perhaps specific to me and perhaps a subject of, rightfully a subject of debate. So everyone agrees there's a huge military capabilities ramp up on the part of China. Not everyone would necessarily agree with this S-curve trajectory that I feel I discern and I think is important. On climate, I think Xi Jinping does not and will not prioritize climate protection. I am a huge skeptic on that. I've been a huge skeptic for a long time. I have publicly advocated that the U.S. not pursue climate negotiations with China. I realize that's a controversial view, but I feel I believe in it and in the analysis that I've done on this, because I don't think that Xi Jinping and other Chinese officials will negotiate sincerely. I think they'll either try to entrap us in linking concessions in other areas, which U.S. officials claim they never will, but there still could be the optics of China portraying it that way. This is very concerning to societies and neighbors in the region. I don't say we should always just do a cartoonish version of we must always look so strong. But if we're portrayed as weak by China, it has real consequences for the confidence of allies and partners in the region. Bottom line is this. Look at the latest reliable, let's say Wall Street Journal, energy analysis assessments of this rapid coal-fired plant build-out under Xi Jinping just since the last big climate summit, where there were all the high-minded, idealistic statements. Bottom line, look at what the PRC does, not just what they say. So my argument, which is also available on my website, I think we should have climate competition, carbon border adjustment tariffs, other things to penalize China for high coal-fired carbon production. I can't guarantee that'll work. What I do believe is that's the only Archimedes lever large enough to actually move Xi Jinping on climate. Anything else ain't gonna work because it's not his priority. He believes that China can adapt to climate change through massive infrastructure solutions that the Chinese Communist Party prefers and is pretty good at. He's not willing to do anything that risks a further slowdown in growth because it's already a bad problem and it's a huge political risk issue. And he would rather, I think, put the climate at more risk, whatever happens, in order to allow the Chinese Communist Party and himself more security and power for another day, month, and year. To me, it's quite obvious. I have some footnotes I can show you. That's my argument. Thank you.
All right.
Well, speaking of timelines, I think this FIDIP is now closed here. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Professor, for a timely and important presentation. He'll be up here if you have other questions. We're going to take a 10-minute break. Come back into your seats, please, by 2:15. Here's your...
Well, we really mean 10 minutes. Don't go far, please. The other panel is in the hold. They're almost ready, so we're going to start right on time.